You know, the Constitution of India, it's so much more than just a dry legal document. Think of it as this incredibly ambitious, revolutionary blueprint. I mean, a plan to build the world's largest democracy, right from the ashes of an empire. So the big question is, how on earth did they pull it off? Well, let's dive in and find out.
So this was the monumental question, right? The one staring India's founders right in the face. How do you possibly unite a subcontinent? I mean, just picture it. A place completely torn apart by the violence of partition, with hundreds of different languages, so many religions, and these really deep, historic social inequalities. The challenge, you see, wasn't just about governing. It was about creating a shared idea of what India could even be.
Okay, so let's look at the timeline. What's really incredible here is that the work actually started before India was even officially independent, back in December 1946. And for almost 3 years, this group of absolute brilliant minds just debated, drafted, and refined every single little clause. It was this massive effort that all came together on January 26, 1950. That's the day the Constitution was officially born, the day India now celebrates as Republic Day.
All right, so who were these brilliant minds? Who were the people behind this absolutely monumental task? Well, they were the members of the Constituent Assembly, and they were the ones handed this almost impossible job. The drafting committee, which was headed up by the brilliant Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, made a really smart, really pragmatic choice. They basically said, hey, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We don't have to reinvent democracy from scratch. So they got to work. They studied the constitutions of dozens of countries, literally looking for the best, most suitable democratic ideas that they could then adapt for India's very unique set of challenges.
And this quote, it just perfectly sums up their whole philosophy. You know, when critics started calling the Constitution a borrowed document, Dr. Ambedkar had this really powerful comeback. He basically argued that the core ideas of a constitution, of democracy, they belong to everyone. It's not about plagiarism. The real genius, he said, wasn't in inventing brand new ideas, but in choosing and then carefully tailoring the right ones specifically for India.
And you can see that global inspiration right here, in action. The whole parliamentary system, that came from the British. The idea of fundamental rights, borrowed from the US Constitution. And those famous ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, straight from France. It's really like a mosaic, a puzzle pieced together from the world's democratic wisdom.
Okay, so what did this blueprint actually promise the people of India? What was the vision? Let's get into the core promises that really shaped this idea for a new kind of nation.
First up, and this is maybe the most important one, the promise of a secular state. Now you have to remember, in a country just torn apart by religious violence, this was a radical declaration. It basically meant the government would not play favorites with religion. Every single citizen was guaranteed the freedom to practice their own faith, or, no faith at all. The bottom line was, the state and religion had to be kept separate.
Then there was this, maybe the boldest promise of all, universal adult franchise. This was just an incredible leap of faith. I mean, think about it. At a time when a lot of Western nations were still arguing about who should get to vote, India just went ahead and gave every single adult, man, woman, rich, poor, literate or not, the power of the vote, right from day one. In a country dealing with massive poverty and illiteracy, critics were screaming that it was a reckless gamble. But the founders, they just called it democracy. And of course, to protect citizens from the sheer power of the state, the Constitution locked in a set of fundamental rights. And listen, these weren't just friendly suggestions. They were legally enforceable guarantees. Things like the right to equality, the right to freedom of speech and expression. These are the absolute bedrock of individual liberty and dignity in India.
But look, a grand vision is just that, a vision, if you don't have a structure to back it up. So how did the Constitution actually plan to make all these promises a reality? Well, it all comes down to the 3 pillars of power and a very clear separation between them.
It's a classic system, really, designed for checks and balances. So you have the legislature, which is the parliament. Their job, make the laws. Then you have the executive, that's the government, led by the prime minister. Their job is to implement those laws, put them into action. And finally, the judiciary, the court system. They act as the ultimate guardian, the referee, interpreting the laws and making sure nothing violates the Constitution itself. Okay, now for one of the biggest puzzles of all. How in the world do you govern a country that's basically the size of a continent? A place with states that are more populous and more diverse than entire nations? The answer they came up with was a very unique kind of federalism, one designed specifically to hold everything together.
And the wording here is so important. The Constitution deliberately calls India a union of states, not a federation of states. Now, that might sound like just splitting hairs, but it wasn't. It was a powerful statement. It basically established that the nation was one single indivisible thing, and crucially, that states could not just decide to break away. This was a direct response to the trauma of partition.
This really makes the difference crystal clear. So think of it this way. The USA is like states coming together to form a nation. But India, it was conceived as one single nation that was then divided into states for administrative purposes. That's a fundamental difference. And it created a system with a very powerful central government, one specifically designed to hold that incredibly diverse nation together. But the framers weren't naive. They were realists. They knew they couldn't possibly predict the future, right? They didn't have a crystal ball. So they did something brilliant. They built a mechanism for change right into the Constitution itself, making sure it wasn't stuck in the past, that it could actually evolve with the times.
Just look at this number. Over 100 amendments in a little more than 70 years. That single number tells you a really powerful story, doesn't it? The Constitution was never meant to be this static, frozen document sitting on a shelf. It's a living, breathing text that is constantly being debated, reinterpreted, and updated to try and meet the changing needs of Indian society.
And here is a perfect example of what that actually looks like in practice. Back in 2002, the Constitution was amended to make education a fundamental right. Now, this wasn't just some minor policy change. This elevated education to the same level of importance as the right to life, the right to liberty. This is the living Constitution in action, evolving and expanding its promises to its people.
And that really brings us to the final crucial question, doesn't it? The Indian Constitution, it was this incredibly radical promise of democracy, liberty, and equality. And now, more than 7 decades later, that promise is still being tested, debated, and fought for every single day. So when we look at India today, it really makes you wonder, what is the Constitution's greatest success? And maybe more importantly, what is its biggest challenge as we move through the 21st century?